The day my life changed started with a piece of paper on a walnut desk, a view of downtown Austin that made the streets look like a key set, and a man who treated silence like a weapon. The paper was a marriage contract, the man was Ronan Vale, and the air between us felt like a storm you can smell before it breaks. He slid a pen toward me and said almost kind, almost cruel, "Sign, Lena, or your father spends the next 20 years in a federal cell," and I remember thinking the room smelled like cedar and mint, while my hands kept shaking, no matter how hard I told them to stop. I tried to look brave, said he must be bluffing, and he tapped the contract like it was a napkin at brunch. 3.1 million doesn't feel like bluffing. I can pull the trigger by noon, and I knew a hammer when I saw one, so I signed each letter a little funeral, then told him he could put my name in his ledger, but he didn't own my heart. He stood tall and sharp in charcoal, with his cuffs rolled once like he'd rushed from a fight, moved close enough for the mint aftershave to reach me and murmured, "We'll see then," ordered a driver, a 72-hour wedding, a penthouse, and one more warning that he was thorough. I made it to the elevator. Before the tears came, not the pretty kind either, the kind you swallow until they fight you back and win. At home, my little brother Matty sat on the couch with a busted controller and crumbs on his hoodie, and I told myself I could do this. I would do this because a roof over him and a chance for Dad to get help was a better bargain than pretending I still had choices. The wedding felt like a corporate merger that accidentally ordered flowers, chandeliers blazing, waiters gliding a string quartet, playing songs for people who didn't listen, and Ronan played the perfect groom with a hand exactly where it belonged at my waist. When the officiant said the words, and he kissed me, it wasn't joy. It was a signature, a claim. And yeah, that happened. And yes, part of me still went dizzy because bodies are traitors sometimes. I slipped to a balcony to breathe, heard two women with high hair and low sympathy whisper about his sister and rumors with the Morales name wrapped around them. And when they saw me, they shut up so fast it could slice a lip. Ronan found me leaning on the rail like it could hold my whole life loosened. His tie stood under a moon that painted his hair silver, and when I said this wasn't about money, and we both knew it, he finally told me why. Her name was Kira, he said, voice steady and bleak. She was 6. There was a summer fair by the river, fireworks, kettle corn, all of it. And our nanny was supposed to watch her, but she left to meet her boyfriend. Your father. Crowds swelled, kids bigger than her. Shoved past, Kira fell, and by the time they pulled her out, it was too late. And then came the part about his dad drinking himself hollow, his mom fading, and a boy who grew into a man, who built a company and a war chest and a promise he never set down. I felt the world tilt under my feet, said I hadn't known, swore it, and he nodded that he believed me but said I'd been the only leverage that could make my father listen. He said, our flight left in 2 hours. I said honeymoon. Like the word belonged to us, he said. Optics and maybe distance to hear himself think. And that was our beginning, not romantic, not clean, just two people who both needed something and didn't like who that made us. We landed on Fogo Island, where the wind could knock thoughts out of your head, and the water looked like old glass, and the inn perched on stilts like it didn't care what gravity thought. I expected cold and got space, a guest room for me, a suite next door for him, no pressure, no theatrics, just a sentence he dropped in the doorway that loosened a knot in my chest I didn't know how to name. Days fell into a rhythm, emails answered like chores and long walks where the ocean tried to narrate. And he told me stories about Kira with dandelions behind her ears, while I told him about my mom painting past midnight with jazz on the radio, and coffee that tasted like burnt sugar. And when he laughed for the first time, it creaked like a gate nobody opened in years. One night by the fire, I asked about the money. The 3.1 million that had felt like a fist, and he stared into the flames. until they answered first with a crack. Then he said my father had taken funds, but not the way he told me that he'd approved a bridge loan and twisted the paperwork until it looked like theft because he needed leverage and weaponized what was easy. I sat with the wind pushing its shoulder against the windows and told him if we were going to try even a little, there would be no more manipulation. Not in big ways or small honesty or nothing. And he nodded with eyes that wouldn't quite let tears fall, said, God help him, he would try that. He didn't know who he was without the armor. But he was willing to find out. The work after that wasn't cinematic, it was ordinary, which is where real change hides if you care to look. Back in Austin, he went to therapy, did the homework, called an aunt he hadn't spoken to in a decade, and listened while she cried. And in his boardroom, I walked in to do a presentation because rumor mills had chewed my name into something sour, and I refused to lie down for it. A man with a pocket square shaped like a sailboat muttered gold digger. So I set down the clicker and said, Sir, I married your boss under duress, which is the opposite of digging for gold. And anyway, men have married up for 10,000 years, and you called it ambition. What do you call it when a woman does the math? Arithmetic. And you could feel the air change, you know what I mean. I took over a community program he'd been funding on autopilot scholarships and grief counseling without the cameras, and I set up a studio in the sunniest corner of our place so my hands could find blue paint again. And one evening, I told him my art wasn't extra. It was how I take care of myself, and he said he was a better man when my fingers were stained, the corniest line he ever said, and I loved him for it. 6 months later, we went back to the island and said new vows on a cliff truth. Even when it makes us look bad, kindness. Even when we were tired, and when we kissed, it felt like a door opening, not like paperwork, and a month later I told him I was pregnant, and the joy on his face terrified me because that's what real joy does. It shows you how much you have to lose. The past, though, doesn't stay buried just because you whisper promises, and the letters arrived in thick envelopes with no return address. Someone who knew about the contract, the loan, the timeline, and our investigator came back with a name I hadn't said out loud in years. Miles, the man I almost married, who'd lost his job and made bad bets and found a leak and thought he could sell our lives for rent money. The lawyers sang their song about quiet settlements, and the PR folks hummed about controlling narratives, and I listened and said no because I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life ducking cameras with a secret in my teeth. We called a press conference in a plain room on a Tuesday morning and sat side by side, and when a reporter asked if this was a stunt, I said if it were, I'd have picked better makeup. They laughed. The ice cracked, and Ronan told the truth with his spine tall, how he weaponized his money and called it justice, how he forced a marriage because grief had hollowed him out, and he took my hand while the bulbs popped and said the only reason he wasn't that man anymore was because I refused to let him hide behind pain. I told them I didn't like the beginning of our story, and I loved where we landed, because we built it brick by brick, with therapy and fights and apologies, without jewelry attached. And if anyone thought forgiveness meant forgetting, they should try it at home and see how fast their bones disagree. The DA peaked. The fines came, the community service was real. Our foundation added a program for people coerced by power they couldn't fight. And Miles tried to sell his version, but it flopped because stories don't swallow easy when the truth has already been told with a full chest. At home, we did ordinary things, because that's what saves you cereal for dinner. Once a week, a building bench installed for Mr. Alvarez on the 4th floor, who swore he didn't need it, which is exactly why he did nights on the balcony, looking at a city that spilled light like it got clumsy with a bucket. And when I asked Ronan if he regretted telling everything, he said, he regretted the harm, not the truth. People ask if I'd do it again, and I hate that question, because life doesn't offer rewind, only forward. So here's the truth. I wish Kira hadn't died. I wish my mom hadn't gotten sick. I wish my dad had asked for help sooner. I wish Ronan had found therapy before he found me. But wishes are pretty lies. And what we had was a mess we learned to carry without letting it carry us. Some days I still flinch when he walks in too quiet because my body remembers signing that paper. Some days he stares at family photos like he's trying to bargain with ghosts. We don't erase it. We hold it together and keep moving. And when a woman at the farmer's market told me her husband lost his job, and maybe she married wrong, said, marrying right isn't about ease, it's about what you do when it's hard. If the person beside you gets smaller when you're hurting, watch your back if they get larger so you can stand in their shadow until your eyes adjust. You might have found a home. So that's my story, not a speech, just the way I'd tell it at your kitchen counter with a mug that says, "World's okayest mom." A contract I signed with a shaking hand. A vow I said with a steady voice, a life I choose every morning. Now tell me yours. Was I wrong to sign? Was he unforgivable to force it? Can someone with that much power ever truly make it right? Or did we just build a pretty ending because it helps us sleep? Drop your take, tell me where you're watching from. Tell me the moment you saw someone really change or the time you decided the truth mattered more than looking good. And if you're holding a contract that feels like a trap, call someone who loves you before you pick up the pen.